I am Shaggy, I am Philolitea, and I am returned to read some more Plato from the Phaedrus, beginning in the middle of the sentence up here at the top of the page, which was the sentence I wanted to begin with. I wanted to begin with right here after wing. Which, being shut up with the emotion, throbbing as with the pulsations of an artery, pricks the aperture which is nearest until at length the entire soul is pierced and maddened and pained, and at the recollection of beauty is again delighted. And from both of them together the soul is oppressed at the strangeness of her condition, and is in a great strait and excitement, and in her madness can neither sleep by day nor abide in her place by night. And you understand that excitement doesn't necessarily mean mania, it means excited. So to excite something is to outcite it, right? And so if you incite something, you cite it inwardly, and a citation, right, is a reference. And so you're kind of like agitated, is what excited means here. And wherever she thinks that she will behold the beautiful one, thither in her desire she runs. And when she has seen him and bathed herself in the waters of beauty, her constraint is loosened, and she is refreshed, and has no more pangs and pains. And this is the sweetest of all pleasures at the time, and is the reason why the soul of the lover will never forsake his beautiful one, whom he esteems above all. He has forgotten mother and brethren and companions, and he thinks nothing of the neglect and loss of his property. The rules and proprieties of life, on which he formerly prided himself, he now despises, and is ready to sleep like a servant, wherever he is allowed, as near as he can to his desired one, who is the object of his worship, and the physician who can alone assuage the greatness of his pain. And this state, my dear imaginary youth, to whom I am talking, is by men called love. And among the gods is a name at which you, in your simplicity, may be inclined to mock. There are 2 lines in the apocryphal writings of Homer in which the name occurs. One of them is rather outrageous and not altogether metrical. They are as follows: mortals call him fluttering love, but the immortals call him winged one, because the growing of wings is a necessity to him. I'm going to jump in right here. Socrates, Plato via Socrates, says right here that these names are outrageous, that he has a cause to be upset about these names being used by Homer, and that they're not metrical. And what that means is that they're not standard names for gods in every poetic tradition, which means that they weren't names used in the Vedic or in the oh, I thought I had it. I've been trying to learn the name of this literary tradition. I don't have it. The tradition that Zoroaster belongs to. That means that these names, Fluttering Love and Winged One, weren't names that were used across Indo-Europe, the Indo-European language family, for their gods, this particular god, which means that what he's saying is that Homer invented this, and we should be upset about it because it's changed. Not we, but Greek people at the time should be upset about it because it's confused their understanding of the word, and that the confusion of the understanding of the word is at Plato, or at Homer, taking liberty to come up with his own names for these gods. So if you've listened to me recently talking on one of the games that I play, I don't remember which live I did, I was talking about this. I talk too much anymore to remember where I said it. I was talking about It would have been one of my Final Fantasy 1 plays where I was actually reading the book or listening to the book. The wheel, the language, or I'm sorry, the horse, the wheel, and language. Just give this guy a second. I guess his loud ass car is more important than what I'm trying to talk about. He'll get around to leaving. This fucking Mustang GT. No, please. Take your time. I'm not obviously sitting here trying to do something. I want to hear that noise. Jesus fuck. Anyway, I was talking about how the Indo-European languages, until as recently as the Persian Empire, across pretty much all of them, use the same poetic names for all of their gods. And so what Plato is talking about here is how Homer broke away from that tradition with eros, with love and affection, concern, care for one another. And he's saying that a lot of the then contemporary cosmopolitan don't really care about one another lifestyle comes from Homer. From this. Mortals call him fluttering love, but the immortals call him winged one, because the growing of wings is a necessity to him. Socrates continues, "You may believe this, but not unless you like. At any rate, the loves of lovers and their causes are such as I have described. The souls attending choose each a deity who is suitable to their own natures. They walk in the ways of their god. Now the lover who is taken to be the attendant of Zeus is better able to bear the winged god, and can endure a heavier burden. But the attendants and companions of Ares, when under the influence of love, if they fancy that they have been at all wronged, are ready to kill and put an end to themselves and their beloved." You understand what that he's talking about here? He's talking about murder self-in. That under the grip of rage, Ares, because you love the woman so much, or a man so much, you'd be willing to destroy themselves and yourself rather than see them with any other one, with anyone else. You know, this is a common thing. And remember, throughout this book, he's explaining to, well, not throughout this book, throughout this palinode, this section of the book, Socrates is explaining to us how love is actually madness. He continues, "And he who follows in the train of any other god while he is unspoiled and the impression lasts, honors and imitates him as far as he is able. And after the manner of his god, he behaves in his intercourse with his beloved and with the rest of the world during the first period of his earthly existence." And intercourse here means talking, the way he interacts, his interactions. Intercourse here means interactions. "Everyone chooses his love from the ranks of beauty according to his character, and this he makes his god, and fashions and adorns as a sort of image which he is to fall down and worship. The followers of Zeus desire that their beloved should be a soul like him, and therefore they seek out some one of a philosophical and imperial nature. And when they have found him and loved him, they do all they can to confirm such a nature in him. And if they have no experience of such a disposition hitherto, they learn of any one who can teach them, and themselves follow in the same way. And they have the less difficulty in finding the nature of their own God in themselves, because they have been compelled to gaze intensely on him." Do you need me to explain this to you? You watch somebody who's wise or who lives a noble life. You watch a Shaggy Philaletea and you feel like, I could do that. What he's doing seems really easy. It seems like it's not worth a lot of money. And then you try it and you go, oh, well, actually, maybe that's a lot more difficult than I thought. And so you imitate him. And it's actually pretty cheap to just learn from it. And they have the less difficulty in finding the nature of their own God in themselves, because they have been compelled to gaze intensely upon him. And then watching that shaggy Philaletheia, teaches them how to find themselves. And then watching him, finding themselves, they can find their way out in this world with a God they can believe in. This is the first time I've read this passage, but I've been living this life for over a calendar year now. 6 years, really. But expanding the kindness to strangers beyond the woman I was living with. A calendar year. 5 years, not 6. It will be 6 at the end of this year. I tend to round up, and that's confusing to people because I'll round up at the beginning of the year. Their recollection clings to him, and they become possessed of him and receive from him their character and disposition, so far as man can participate in God. The qualities of their God they attribute to the beloved, wherefore they love him all the more, and if, like the Bacchic nymphs, they draw inspiration from Zeus, they pour out their own fountain upon him, wanting to make him as like as possible to their own God. But those who are the followers of Here seek a royal love, and when they have found him, they do just the same with him. And in like manner, the followers of Apollo and of every other god walking in the ways of their God seek a love who is to be made like him whom they serve. And when they have found him, they themselves imitate their God and persuade their love to do the same, and educate him into the manner and nature of the God as far as they each can. Doesn't this sound like Christianity to you? Doesn't this sound like the first several centuries of Christianity to you? Where do you think Jesus' followers got the idea? I'm reading Luke today. I came to read this right now because I was reading Luke earlier and I noticed things that nobody talked about, and I thought, well, finish the project in the book you've already started. You've already got so many books you're reading all at once. Read this one. Don't think about Luke until you're done at least with this book. Then you can talk about Luke. Well, I'm talking about Luke. Well, I was for a second there. This is exactly what the early Christian tradition was. The Gospels don't have traditions of transmission, who the authors were, how they got into circulation, how they weren't destroyed by the Roman Imperium during circulation, and how they became canon. These things are mysterious and left mysterious on purpose. And in fact, they're difficult to deal with from a historical perspective because they've been left mysterious on purpose, which means that they were intentionally made mysterious. Well, in Latin, when we talk about something being made mysterious, we use the word occult. Because the Greek word mysterion, which means the actual ceremonies, the actual magic of the religion. So the mysterion would be things like the Eucharist, the turning of the bread into the body and the wine into the blood. That's a magical ceremony. That's a mystery. That's a mysterion. That's occult. That's Christian occult. Secrets. Man, I tell you what, there are secrets. There are secrets all over Christianity, because the first Gospels that were written apart from Luke, Matthew and Mark, that were written apart from Paul, Matthew and Mark, were written like 15 years after the persecutions had already begun. That's not meaningless. That means there was a conspiracy. There had to have been a conspiracy. There had to have been a cult. Why? Because that's what they were doing. and they were hiding it all under the nose of Roman officials. And so if Luke is written in AD 80 AD, that means that Luke was written 16 years after the first documented Roman persecution of Christians in AD 64. AD 64 is about 30 years after Jesus. And so you can notice neat 15-year divisions between these things happening. Jesus dies. 2 sections of 15 years later, there are persecutions. Another section of 15 years later, there are books about who the real lived person Jesus was in greater and greater specificity. There's no gospel queue. Gospel queue doesn't exist. There wasn't a sayings gospel floating around. I know that because if there were a sayings gospel floating around, Gospel Thomas would have more. It would have more similarities with the previous gospels because it wouldn't have been able to get away with changing so many of the things that Jesus said to fit their particular Jesus, their presentation of Jesus. Because the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas was written sometime in the 2nd century, sometime after that 100-year, right? Sometime after 101 AD, and that's another 15. That's actually 2 more 15 divisions. And a division of 15 years is a generation. You understand? It takes 15 years from birth to adult maturity. 15, you're ready to engage in the adult male world. At the age of 13, you're sexually mature, and you're expected across Indo-European civilization, I'm assuming the same in Semitic civilization and North African civilization, that at 13 you're expected to have a job, you're expected to be providing for your family in a meaningful way, and by age 16 you're expected to be working toward having your own family and being the fuck out of the house at 16. Genetically speaking, but definitely in the 1st century. And so when we're talking about 15 years, at 15 years in your life, you're old enough to have 2 children. If you're a female. If you're 15, you're old enough to have infinite children as a male. You started early enough and you worked every single day at it. Okay. I want to read that whole paragraph again. In that same manner, the followers of Apollo, this is 300 years before Jesus, but we could say, in that same manner, the followers of Jesus and of every other God, walking in the ways of their God, seek a love who is to be made like him whom they serve. And they did call Jesus things like the light, they called him life, they called him Sophia, they called him wisdom, not wisdom, they called him truth. And all of these words actually had Greek names. So they called him things like Zoe, which is also what that's what the Septuagint calls Eve. Zoe. So they called him Eve. Could you imagine that? You're praying at church on Sunday to Eve, but the icon at whom you're praying is not the primordial female, as a female with the fig leaves. It's Jesus, the man, the lived person, not the metaphor. That's what 1st century people were doing in this model, because they were reading Plato. They were reading this book intensely. So in that same manner, the followers of Apollo and of every other god, walking in the ways of their God, seek a love. Jesus talks about what? Love thy neighbor. You don't have to look very far for a love if your neighbor has given it to you and to everyone, and you're giving it to your neighbor and everyone. Seek a love who is to be made like him whom they serve. And when they have found him, they themselves imitate their God and persuade their love to do the same. And educate him into the manner and nature of the God as far as they each can. And isn't again, we already did the name swap, but isn't that exactly what that community of people was doing? That's exactly how the book of Luke opens. For the better edification of your soul, Theophilus, I'm going to tell you this story because I actually know some secret about it that the other people who have written books about it don't know. That's how Luke opens. The Greek is even more mysterious than the English, and the English there is pretty mysterious. And Theophilus Theophilus was a common name, but that itself might be a mystery. That might not actually be there might not have been a real dude, Theophilus, that book was being directed to. Thus fair and blissful to the beloved is the desire of the inspired lover, and the imitation of which I speak into the mysteries of true love, if he be captured by the lover and their purpose is effected. Now, the beloved is taken captive in the following manner. The character of the two steeds. At the vision of beauty, the ill-conditioned steed rushes on to enjoy, but is restrained by his companion. The dad is dragging his feet like that. People are so rude. They see and hear me doing this, and they just make as much noise as possible. If he be captured by the lover, at the vision of beauty and the ill-conditioned steed rushes on to enjoy, but is restrained by his companion and by the charioteer. As I said at the beginning of this tale, I divided each soul into three, 2 horses and a charioteer. And one of the horses was good and the other bad. The division may remain, but I have not yet explained in what the goodness or badness of either consists, and to that I will now proceed. The right-hand horse is upright and cleanly made. He has a lofty neck and an aquiline nose. His color is white and his eyes dark. He is a lover of honor and modesty and temperance and the follower of true glory. He needs no touch of the whip, but is guided by word and admonition only. The other is a crooked, lumbering animal put together anyhow. He has a short, thick neck. He is flat-faced and of a dark color, with gray eyes and blood-red complexion. The mate of insolence and pride, shag-eared and deaf, hardly yielding to whip and spur. Now, when the charioteer beholds the vision of love and has his whole soul warmed through sense, he is full of the prickings and ticklings of desire, the obedient steed, then, as always, under the government of shame, refrains from leaping on the beloved, but the other, heedless of the pricks and of the blows of the whip, plunges and runs away, giving all manner of trouble to his companion and the charioteer, whom he forces to approach the beloved and to remember the joys of love. They at first indignantly oppose him and will not be urged on to do terrible and unlawful deeds. But at last, when he persists in plaguing them, they yield and agree to do as he bids them. And now they are at the spot and behold the flashing beauty of the beloved, which, when the charioteer sees, his memory is carried to the true beauty, whom he beholds in company with modesty, like an image placed upon a holy pedestal. He sees her, but he is afraid and falls backward in adoration, and by his fall is compelled to pull back the reins with such violence as to bring both the steeds on their haunches, the one willing and unresisting, the unruly one very unwilling. And when they have gone back a little, the one is overcome with shame and wonder, and his whole soul is bathed in perspiration. The other, when the pain is over, which the bridle and the fall had given him, having with difficulty taken breath, is full of wrath and reproaches, which he heaps upon the charioteer and his fellow steed, for want of courage and courage and manhood, declaring that they have been false to their agreement and guilty of desertion. Again they refuse, and again he urges them on, and will scarce yield to their prayer that he would wait another time. When the appointed hour comes, they make as if they had forgotten, and he reminds them, fighting and neighing and dragging them on, until at length he, on the same thoughts intent, forces them to draw near again. And when they are near, he stoops his head and puts up his tail and takes the bit in his teeth and pulls shamelessly. Then the charioteer is worse off than ever. He falls back like a racer at the barrier, and with a still more violent wrench drags the bit out of the teeth of the wild steed and covers his abusive tongue and jaws with blood, the forces of his legs and haunches to the ground, and punishes him sorely. And when this has happened several times and the villain has ceased from his wanton way, he is tamed and humbled and follows the will of the charioteer. And when he sees the beautiful one, he is ready to die of fear. And from that time forward, the soul of the lover follows the beloved in modesty and holy fear. The reflection of the beloved in the lover. Some satisfaction of sensual pleasure also gained. Why did they do this with the sentences that way? Anyway, sorry. And so the beloved who, like a god, has received every true and loyal service from his lover, not in pretense, but in reality, being also himself of a nature friendly to his admirer, if in former days he has blushed to own his passion and turned away his lover, because his youthful companions or others slanderously told him that he would be disgraced, now as years advance, at the appointed age and time, it is led to receive him into communion. For fate, which has ordained that there shall be no friendship among the evil, has also ordained that there shall ever be friendship among the good. And the beloved, when he has received him into communion and intimacy, is quite amazed at the goodwill of the lover. He recognizes that the inspired friend is worth all other friends or kinsmen. They have nothing of friendship in them worthy to be compared with his. Do you understand here that it's saying that people who don't like people because they're bad people? You understand that people who say, I just don't like people, they say that because they're bad people, because they're not likable. I love humans. I just have a very, very low threshold when it comes to tolerance for abuse. Humans are fascinating. We're the most interesting animal on the planet, but we're also the rudest animal on the planet. A human will go out of their way to fuck up your day. Rabbits can't. And the beloved, when he has received him into communion and intimacy, is quite amazed at the goodwill of the lover. He recognizes that the inspired friend is worth all other friends or kinsmen. They have nothing of friendship in them worthy to be compared with his. And when this feeling continues and he is nearer to him and embraces him, in gymnastic exercises and at other times of meeting, when the fountain of that stream which Zeus, when he was in love with Ganymede named Desire, overflows upon the lover, and some enters into his soul, and some, when he is filled, flows out again, and as a breeze or an echo rebounds from the smooth rocks and returns whence it came, so does the stream of beauty, passing through the eyes, which are the windows of the soul, come back to the beautiful one. There arriving and quickening the passages of the wings, watering them and inclining them to grow, and filling the soul of the beloved also with love. And thus he loves, but he knows not what. He does not understand and cannot explain his own state. He appears to have caught the infection of blindness from another. You understand, if you're listening to this and you're watching my short form work as well, or maybe my medium form work, my work that's under an hour long, you will recognize when I'm talking about, like, if you want to have a relationship with your wife or your significant other that's healthy, I meant to say your significant other or spouse, not wife. I was going to say wife or boyfriend, something like that, but I chose to change my mind. Anyway, if you're going to have a relationship that matters with your spouse or your significant other, you need to already have a relationship with your parents that matters. And you might be recognizing what I'm talking about here, that if you penetrate somebody before you know them, thus he loves, but he knows not what he loves. He does not understand and cannot explain his own state. If you can't articulate how you feel, you don't understand how you feel, right? If you can't define a word, you don't understand the word. If you can't define it, you don't know it, so you can't use it. You shouldn't be using it. You can use it, you just can't use it with the efficacy. You can't use it as well as if you did know it. It's like being a swordsman, right? But not knowing the particular sword you're about to fight with. That's why duels, right, use neutral weapons. You're not allowed to use a pistol or a knife or a rapier that you use every day. That gives you an unfair advantage. You know that weapon. You might know your weapon better than I know this entire field of weaponry. So at least if we have the same weapon, we have the same weapon. We have the same lack of familiarity with the weapon. And so if you don't know the people you're sleeping with, they don't know you either. And so like this whole thing of like men and women do it, but women are the ones who talk about it because women can sleep with huge numbers of people way easier than men can just biologically, because more men are willing to say yes to any given woman than any given man. They complain about feeling empty after casual sexual encounters, and it's like, well, yeah, the person that you just let inside you didn't know you. And so they can't explain the state they're in vis-a-vis you. That's why guys will just run to telling a girl, jump right to telling her, well, I love you. So they'll give up the genitals. And then they're like, well, everybody who tells me they love me just wants my genitals. And it's like, right. They can't be honest with you about what they want with you because they don't know you. They can't speak to you like they know you. You understand? That's why flirtation and dating outside of large friend groups is so difficult, right? Because you don't know the people that you're talking to. And so everything they say is potential sexual assault. Because if you escalate flirting to anything beyond the superficial and the totally tame, you're risking that sound because you don't know the person and they haven't given you consent over years and years and years and years of familiarity. And so it's like you've caught blindness, the infection of blindness from another. The lover is his mirror in whom he is beholding himself, but he is not aware of this. Again, women, everyone that you let inside you is a mirror of who you are. When he's with the lover, both cease from their pain, but when he is away, then he longs as he is longed for and has love's image, love for love, lodging in his breast, which he calls and believes to be not love, but friendship only, and his desire is as the desire of the other, but weaker. He wants to see him, touch him, kiss, embrace him, and probably not long afterwards his desire is accomplished. When they meet, the wanton steed of the lover has a word to say to the charioteer. He would like to have a little pleasure in return for many pains, but the wanton steed of the beloved says not a word, for he is bursting with passion which he understands not. He throws his arms around the lover and embraces him as his dearest friend. And you understand here that what he's describing, he's explaining the biological function of desire. He's explaining why men get boners. Men get these boners and they really feel like someone needs to help them get rid of them, because there is a non-zero chance that tomorrow in the evolutionary context of the world ancient from Plato's day, you weren't guaranteed to survive the night. So having survived the day, but what he's saying here is that it's not just a perversion of the biological ritual when it's between two men. It's just silly release. It's just silly. The wanton steed of the lover has a word to say to the charioteer. He would like to have a little pleasure in return for many pains, but the wanton steed of the beloved says not a word, for he is bursting with passion which he understands not. He throws his arms around the lover and embraces him as his dearest friend, and when they are side by side, he is not in a state in which he can refuse the lover anything if he asks him, although his steed and the charioteer oppose him with the arguments of shame and reason. After this, their happiness depends upon their self-control. If the better elements of the mind which lead to order and philosophy prevail, then they pass their life here in happiness and harmony, masters of themselves and orderly, enslaving the vicious and emancipating the virtuous elements of the soul. And when the end comes, they are light and winged for flight, having conquered and won of the three heavenly or truly Olympian victories. Nor can human discipline or divine inspiration confer any greater blessings on man than this, if, on the other hand, they leave philosophy and lead the lower life of ambition. Then probably after wine or in some other careless hour, the two wanton animals take the two souls when off their guard and bring them together, and they accomplish that desire of their hearts, which to the many is bliss. And this having once enjoyed, they continue to enjoy, yet rarely, because they have not the approval of the whole soul. They too are dear, but not so dear to one another as the others, either at the time of their love or afterwards. He's talking about chasing the white dragon of orgasm. You understand that, right? Look, I'm a male. I get it. I understand what he's talking about entirely. They too are dear, but not so dear to one another as the others, either at the time of their love or afterwards. And what that means is that, you know, the mutual coming together of true lovers who are procreating for the future is greater than the, well, I feel kind of dirty for doing that to you, so I'm gonna go. And then when I miss you, you know, it'll be like intense again. But for now, I gotta get the fuck away from you. That's what he's describing. They consider that they have given and taken from each other the most sacred privileges, pledges, and they may not break them and fall into enmity. At last they pass out of the body unwinged but eager to soar, and thus obtain no mean reward of love and madness. For those who have once begun the heavenward pilgrimage may not go down again to darkness and the journey beneath the earth, but they live in light always, happy companions in their pilgrimage, and when the time comes at which they receive their wings, they have the same plumage because of their love. Thus great are the heavenly blessings which the friendship of a lover will confer upon you, my youth, whereas the attachment of the non-lover, which is alloyed with a worldly prudence and has worldly and niggardly ways of doling out benefits, will breed in your soul those vulgar qualities which the populace applaud, will send you bowling round the earth during a period of 9,000 years and leave you a fool in the world below. Evidently, I read this last time, and I stopped at Phaedrus' speech. And so that's fine. I don't remember reading it, so this is as much for me as it is for you. The poetical form is only intended to please Phaedrus. I hate that the editor did that and didn't put it in a different damn font. Anyway. And thus, dear Eros, I have made and paid my recantation, as well and as fairly as I could, more especially in the matter of the poetical figures which I was compelled to use because Phaedrus would have them. And now forgive the past and accept the present, and be gracious and merciful to me, and do not in thine anger deprive me of sight, or take from me the art of love which thou hast given me, but grant that I may be yet more esteemed in the eyes of the fair. And literally he says, don't eunuch me or gouge my eyes out, please. And if Phaedrus, or I myself, said anything rude in our first speeches, blame Lysias, who is the father of that brat, and let us have no more of his progeny. Bid him study philosophy like his brother Polemarchus, and then his lover Phaedrus will no longer halt between two opinions, but will dedicate himself wholly to love and to philosophical discourses. To which Phaedrus says, This speech is far finer than that of Lysias, who will be out of conceit with himself. I join in the prayer, Socrates, and say with you, if this be for my good, may your words come to pass. But why did you make your second oration so much finer than the first? I wonder why. And I begin to be afraid that I shall lose conceit of Lysias, and that he will appear tame in comparison, even if he will be willing to put another as fine and as long as yours into the field, which I doubt. For quite lately, one of your politicians was abusing him on this very account, and called him a speech writer again and again, so that a feeling of pride may probably induce him to give up writing speeches. That's funny. Basically what he's saying is that because Lysias is very much like a young shaggy dog, Philauleikeia, maybe even a shaggy dog philosopher, when people tell him to do something a certain way, he says, fuck you, I'm not doing this at all. I can respect that. In fact, I can represent that. Socrates then says, what a very amusing notion. But I think, my young man, that you are much mistaken in your friend if you imagine that he is frightened at a little noise, and possibly you think that his assailant was in earnest? To which Phaedrus responds, the politicians are fond of writing. I thought, Socrates, that he was, and you are aware that the greatest and most influential statesmen are ashamed of writing speeches and leaving them in a written form, lest they should be called sophists by posterity. Again, with the Luke thing, and how did these Gospels, how did they get into wide circulation among Platonists and Neoplatonists? How did they get into wide circulation among these people? Well, he just told us. Leaving your writings for people to see so that they weren't memorized and you weren't speaking them out in public, having them memorized. That was a damnable mistake back then. It was damnable arrogance to teach to your textbook, which is something that plenty of university teachers do today. And Socrates responds, they are always rehearsing their own praises in the form of laws. You seem to be unconscious, Phaedrus, that the sweet elbow of the proverb is really the long arm of the Nile. And you appear to be equally unaware of the fact that this sweet elbow of theirs is also a long arm. Now, I don't know what that idiom means, and we're just moving on. For there is nothing of which our great politicians are so fond as of writing speeches and bequeathing them to posterity. And they add their admirers' names at the top of the writing out of gratitude to them, which is what I noticed in Luke, too. It begins, verse 3, line 3, is who the book is being written for. The Theophilus of note. Anyway, Phaedrus says, what do you mean? I do not understand. And Socrates, who is several hundred years before Luke, says, why, do you not know that when a politician writes, he begins with the names of his approvers? How so, asks Phaedrus, and Socrates says, why, he begins in this manner, be it enacted by the Senate, the people, or both, on the mention of a certain person, who is our author, and so putting on a serious face, he proceeds to display his own wisdom to his admirers in what is often a long and tedious composition. The Gospels do this. Now, what is that sort of thing but a regular piece of authorship? To which Phaedrus says, well, true. And Socrates, and by regular he means ordinary. It happens frequently, common. And Socrates says, and if the law is finally approved, then the author leaves the theater in high delight. But if the law is rejected and he is done out of his speech-making and not thought good enough to write, then he and his party are in mourning. This is our current government. It didn't used to be this way. It didn't used to be this way. But this is how we've been since Obama and the healthcare thing. This is Hillary Clinton's entire career. Is this what he's describing? And Phaedrus says, well, very true. And Socrates goes on with, so far, So far are they from despising, or rather, so highly do they value the practice of writing. And Phaedrus says, well, no doubt. And Socrates says, they become like gods. And when the king or orator has the power, and Lycurgus or Solon, as Lycurgus or Solon or Darius had, of attaining an immortality of authorship and estate, is he not thought by posterity when they see his companions? And does he not think himself, while he is yet alive, to be a god? Phaedrus says, well, very true. And Socrates says, then do you think that any one of this class, however ill despised, would reproach Lysias with being an author? My buddy Matt is kind of working on this idea and trying to get himself into a place where he's comfortable with the idea of authorship being godhood. But that's what it is. So Socrates asks, then do you think that any one of this class, however ill despised, would reproach Lysias with being an author? Phaedrus says, well, not upon your view, for according to you, he would be casting a slur upon his own favorite pursuit. I say that on Twitter all the time. I'm like, well, don't you write? And people are like, no, I don't write. And I'm like, well, then how am I reading what you just wrote if you didn't write it? And they're like, well, I mean, I'm not like an author like Stephen King. And I'm like, well, Stephen King does the same dumb shit on Twitter that you're doing right now. So how are you different? You're disparaging the art of writing by saying that you're not writing. What are you doing? Socrates answers, anyone may see that there is no disgrace in the mere fact of writing. Phaedrus says, certainly not. And Socrates says, the disgrace begins when a man writes not well, but badly. And you can go to my earlier live today and hear me make that argument. Phaedrus says, well, clearly. And Socrates says, and what is well and what is badly? Need we ask Lysias or any other poet or orator who ever wrote or will ever write, whether a political or any other work in meter or out of meter, poet or prose writer, to teach us this? And Phaedrus says, what motive is higher than the love of discourse? Need we? For what should a man live, if not for the pleasures of discourse? Surely not for the sake of bodily pleasures, which almost always have a previous pain as a condition of them. And what he means there in our language is a prior trauma, and therefore are rightly called slavish. Socrates responds, the grasshoppers will laugh at us if we sleep. There is time enough, and I believe that the grasshoppers chirruping after their manner in the heat of the sun over our heads are talking to one another and looking down at us. What would they say if they saw that we, like the many, are not conversing, but slumbering at midday, lulled by their voices, too indolent to think? Would they not have a right to laugh at us? They might imagine that we were slaves, who, coming to rest at a place of resort of theirs, like sheep lie asleep at noon around the well. But if they see us discoursing, and like Odysseus sailing past them, deaf to their siren voices, they may perhaps, out of respect, give us of the gifts which they receive from the gods, that they may impart them to men. Phaedrus says, what gifts do you mean? I never heard of any. And Socrates says, the grasshoppers were originally men who died from the love of song. A lover of music like yourself ought surely to have heard the story of the grasshoppers, who are said to have been human beings in an age before the Muses. And when the Muses came and song appeared, and they were ravished with delight, and singing always, never thought of eating and drinking until at last, in their forgetfulness, they died. And now they live again in the grasshoppers. And this is the return which the Muses make to them. They never hunger nor thirst, but from the hour of their birth are always singing and never eating or drinking. And when they die, they go and inform the Muses in heaven, who honors them on earth. They win the love of Terpsichore for the dancers by their report of them, of Erato for the lovers, and of the Muses for those who do them honor according to the several days of honoring them. Of Calliope, the eldest muse and of Urania, who is next to her, for the philosophers, of those of whose music the grasshoppers make report to them. For these are the Muses who are chiefly concerned with heaven and thought divine as well as human, and they have the sweetest utterance. For many reasons, then, we ought always to talk and not to sleep at midday. Phaedrus says, all right, well, let us talk. You know, this is so funny. This is so ironic, because I had a girlfriend, and I have other friends, especially this is a common thing for people on antidepressants, is to want to sleep in the comfortable part of the middle part of the day when the work that needs to be done is done, but the work that needs to be doing toward dinner doesn't need to be done. Taking that half hour or that hour or maybe even 2 hours and just sleeping it away because you don't need to not do that is very common among people who make a decent living, more than what they need to survive. And it's extremely common among people with people on antidepressants. And it's so funny too, because I've had a lot of relationships where I'm like, hey, let's sit around and enjoy the day by talking, see what we can learn, see where we can get spiritually and cognitively, philosophically. And they're like, nah, I'm gonna go take a nap. And so I read these books and I go and I dialogue with these books instead. And now when that happens is when I'm live. So I need more Patreon subscribers. I need more Patreon subscribers at $10 a month or more, so I have more people to pester during the day when my friends are sleeping. Phaedrus says, well, let us talk then. And Socrates responds, shall we discuss the rules of writing and speech as we were proposing? Well, very good, Phaedrus says. And good speaking, should not the mind of the speaker know the truth of the matter about which he is going to speak? Socrates. Ooh. Oh. Ah. I got something. There it is. I had a seed, or I had some kind of plant matter in my sinuses there for a second. Okay. Socrates says, or asks, in good speaking, should not the mind of the speaker know the truth of the matter about which he is going to speak? Should you not already know the deeper truths about which you're going to speak, leaving them unsaid, so that when people come to you and ask you about the deeper truths, you're already prepared? Should you not do that? Asked Socrates. I told a story about how and why I do that on my earlier meditative live this morning. Phaedrus responds, does the orator require to have knowledge? And yet, Socrates, I have heard that he who would be an orator has nothing to do with true justice, but only with that which is likely to be approved by the many who sit in judgment. I'm going to read that sentence over. And yet, Shaggy Philolitea, I have heard that he who would be a YouTuber has nothing to do with true justice or entertainment, but only with that which is likely to be approved by the many who sit in judgment, nor with the truly good or honorable, but only with opinion about them, and that from opinion comes persuasion and not from the truth. And Socrates says, the words of the wise are not to be set aside, for there is probably something in them, and therefore the meaning of this saying is not hastily to be dismissed. Well, very true, says Phaedrus. Of course, Socrates responds, or else he will put good for evil, just as he might put a horse in the place of an ass. Let us put the matter thus, because you understand, you can put a donkey or you can put a mule in the place of an ass, or in the place of a horse. You can have it pull your war chariot, or you could ride it into battle, or you could have it pull your carriage instead of a horse. A donkey or a mule, they're cheaper, but they're not as good for the job. Let us put the matter thus. Suppose that I persuaded you to buy a horse and go to the wars. Neither of us knew what a horse was like, but I knew that you believed the horse to be of tame animals and the one which has the longest ears. That would be ridiculous, Phaedrus says. That would be a donkey. Socrates says, there's something more ridiculous coming. Suppose further that in sober earnest I, having persuaded you of this, went and composed a speech in honor of an ass, whom I entitled a horse, beginning, a noble animal and a most useful possession, especially in war. And you may get on his back and fight, and he will carry baggage or anything. And Phaedrus says, how ridiculous. And Socrates says, ridiculous, yes. But is not even a ridiculous friend better than a cunning enemy? To which Phaedrus says, well, certainly. And Socrates continues, and when the orator, instead of putting an ass in the place of a horse, puts good for evil, being himself as ignorant of their true nature as the city on which he composes is ignorant, and having studied the notions of the multitude, falsely persuades them not about the shadow of an ass, which he confounds with a horse, but about good, which he confounds with evil. What will be the harvest which rhetoric will be likely to gather after the sowing of that seed? And Phaedrus says, well, the reverse of good. And Socrates says, naturally, the mere knowledge of the truth, not enough to give the art of persuasion, but neither is the art of persuasion separable from the truth. But perhaps rhetoric has been getting too roughly handled by us, and she might answer, but what amazing nonsense you are talking, as if I forced any man to learn to speak in ignorance of the truth. Whatever my advice may be worth, he says, Socrates says that Lady Rhetoric says, I should have told him to arrive at the truth first, and then come to me, Rhetoric. At the same time, I boldly assert that mere knowledge of the truth will not give you the art of persuasion. Phaedrus says, there is reason in the lady's defense of herself. And Socrates continues, quite true, if only the other arguments which remain to be brought up bear her witness that she is an art at all. But I seem to hear them arraying themselves on the opposite, that she speaks falsely, and that rhetoric is a mere routine and trick, not an art. Lo! A Spartan appears and says that there never is nor will ever be a real art of speaking, which is divorced from the truth. And Phaedrus says, and what are these arguments, Socrates? Bring them out, that we may examine them. And Socrates says, come out, fair children, and convince Phaedrus, who is the father of similar beauties, that he will never be able to speak about anything to speak, unless he have a knowledge of philosophy, and let Phaedrus answer you. And so you've probably heard me today, I said that if you can't define a word for yourself, you don't know it, and you shouldn't be using it. That's what he's saying here. And Phaedrus says, put the question. Socrates says, the rhetorician can produce any impression which he pleases, in any place or upon any occasion. Is not rhetoric taken generally a universal art of enchanting the mind by arguments, which is practiced not only in courts and public assemblies, but in private houses also, having to do with all matters, great as well as small, good and bad alike, and is in all equally right and equally to be esteemed? That is what you've heard. Phaedrus says, nay, not exactly that. I should say rather that I have heard the art confined to speaking and writing in lawsuits, and to speaking in public assemblies, not extended further. And Socrates adds, then I suppose that you have only heard of the rhetoric of Nestor and Odysseus, which they composed in their leisure hours when at Troy, and never of the rhetoric of Palamedes. And Phaedrus says, Gorgias and Thrasymachus, or Theodorus, in the disguise of Nestor and Odysseus. No more than of Nestor and Odysseus, unless Gorgias is your Nestor, and Thrasymachus or Theodorus your Odysseus. And Socrates says, perhaps that is my meaning, but let us leave them. And do you tell me instead what are plaintiff and defendant doing in a law court? Are they not contending? Phaedrus says, well, exactly so. Socrates says, and again, this is beautiful Socratic irony, because, Socrates dies after a trial. About the just and unjust, that is the matter in dispute. Phaedrus says, yes. Socrates says, and a professor of the art will make the same thing appear to the same persons to be at one time just, at another time, if he is so inclined, to be unjust. Phaedrus says, exactly. Socrates then says, and when he speaks in the assembly, he will make the same things seem good to the city at one time, and at another time the reverse of good. Phaedrus says that is true. Socrates says, Zeno. I don't think he actually says Zeno the Eleatic, but have we not heard of the Eleatic Calamities? Zeno, who has an art of speaking by which he makes the same things appear to his hearers like and unlike, one and many, at rest and in motion. And again, I remind you that public speakers, orators, were the players of the ancient world shell games. That's what they were doing. They were getting into arguments with people, winning those arguments, and then those people were giving them money. And so like when you come into my live, this is my first look, 2 likes, that's actually not bad. How am I doing for time? When you come in here and you get in my comments or my chat and you want to argue with me and you lose, you owe me money. A lot of people on the internet owe me a lot of money. It's true. Phaedrus says, very true. And Socrates says, the deceiver must know the truth because he has to find a likeness of the truth. He must, oh no. What have I done? He must learn to deceive by degrees. The art of disputation, then, is not confined to the courts and the assembly, but is one and the same in every use of language. This is the art, if there be such an art, which is able to find a likeness of everything to which a likeness can be found, and draws into the light of day the likenesses and disguises which are used by others. He's talking about my art now. Connecting everything to everything else. Drawing the light out of the dark. Bringing the light into the dark. Unmasking the mask. Discovering the disguise. Like these are my work. This is what I'm doing. And he's describing it. Phaedrus, how do you mean? Socrates, let me put the matter thus. When will there be more chance of deception? When the difference is large or small? When the difference is small. And you will be less likely to be discovered in passing by degrees into the other extreme than when you go all at once. Of course. He then, who would deceive others and not be deceived, must exactly know the real likenesses and differences of things. He must. And if he is ignorant of the true nature of any subject, how can he detect the greater or less degree of likeness in other things to that of which, by the hypothesis, he is ignorant? He cannot. And when men are deceived and their notions are at variance with realities, it is clear that the error slips in through resemblances. Yes, that is the way. Then he who would be a master of the art must understand the real nature of everything. Or he will never know either how to make the gradual departure from truth into the opposite of truth, which is effected by the help of resemblances, or how to avoid it. And again, the word that he's saying here, it's actually funny. What he's saying is the departure from aletheia into the opposite of aletheia, which is effected by the help of resemblances, or how to avoid it. And again, aletheia means not forgetting. So he just said to make the gradual departure from not forgetting into the opposite of not forgetting, which is effected by the help of resemblances. He will not, Phaedrus says. He then, who being ignorant of the truth aims at appearances, will only attain at an art of rhetoric which is ridiculous and is not an art at all. And you understand that ridiculous means deserving of ridicule, right? Phaedrus says that may be expected. Illustrations of skill and want of skill from this. Why does he do that? Anyway, that's why so many YouTubers get upset with me when I comment on their work, because I ridicule them for being ignorant of the truth, even though they have expensive degrees and lots of followers and that pretty gold or even platinum plaque. Shall I propose that we look for examples of art and want of art, according to our notion of them, in the speech of Lysias, which you have in your hand, and in my own speech? Phaedrus says nothing could be better. And indeed, I think that our previous argument has been too abstract and wanting in illustrations. And Socrates says yes. And the two speeches happen to afford a very good example of the way in which the speaker who knows the truth may, without any serious purpose, steal away the hearts of his hearers. Something I can't be doing. I'm giving you the armor against it by reading this to you. This piece of good fortune I attribute to the local deities, and perhaps the prophets of the muses who are singing over our heads may have imparted their inspiration to me. For I do not imagine that I have any rhetorical art of my own. I certainly don't believe I have any rhetorical art of my own. That's why I call myself a shaggy dog storyteller. I'm not good enough at rhetoric to be a true teacher, to be a true pedagogue. That means educator of children. Phaedrus says, granted, if you will only please to get on. He wants Phaedrus to finish this badly. And Socrates is saying, suppose that you read me the first words of Lysias' speech. And Phaedrus says, you know how matters stand with me, and how, as I conceive, they might be arranged for our common interest. And I maintain that I ought not to fail in my suit, because I am not your lover. For lovers repent. Enough. Now, shall I point out the rhetorical error of those words? Yes. The rhetorician should distinguish things such as iron and silver, about which we are agreed, from things such as justice and goodness, about which we are disagreed. Everyone is aware that about some things we are agreed, whereas about other things we differ. And this is what I'm always talking about. I talked about this morning with etymologies. I'm always talking about this. There are words whose meaning we agree on, and there are words whose meaning we do not agree on. And if we are going to use words whose meaning we do not agree on, we have to establish how we are using them, or we are subtly lying to our audience. We are trying to deceive them. If we are using words that everyone agrees on in ways other than how everyone agrees on with them, we are more than subtly deceiving our audiences. And Phaedrus says, I think that I understand you, but will you explain yourself? And Socrates says, when anyone speaks of iron and silver, is not the same thing present in the minds of all? Phaedrus says, certainly. But when anyone speaks of justice and goodness, we part company and are at odds with one another and with ourselves. Precisely. Then in some things we agree, but not in others? That is true. In which are we more likely to be deceived? And in which has rhetoric the greater power? Phaedrus says, clearly in the uncertain class. Socrates responds, then the rhetorician ought to make a regular division and acquire a distinct notion of both classes, as well of that in which the many err, as of that in which they do not err. And Phaedrus says, he who made such a distinction would have an excellent principle. That means starting place. Socrates says, yes. And in the next place, he must have a keen eye for the observation of particulars in speaking and not make a mistake about the class to which they are to be referred. And Phaedrus says, certainly. And this is why if you look at the comments that I leave on other channels, I'll get at people right at the start of their video or whatever about not knowing what the words they're using mean. And I'll note right out on your whole presentation, you don't get slack from the shags because you're not giving the shags slack. You're not subscribed to the shags. You're not helping me get better by giving me good faith commentary. So I'm going to leave ugly, cutting to the bone good faith commentary because you can't fucking stop me. Socrates continues, love belongs to the debatable class. Now, to which class does love belong? Fuck you, man. Fuck this editor. Now, to which class does love belong? Socrates asks. To the debatable or to the undisputed class? And Phaedrus says, to the debatable, clearly, for if not, do you think that love would have allowed you to say as you did, that he is an evil both to the lover and the beloved, and also the greatest possible good? And Socrates responds, capital. But will you tell me whether I defined love at the beginning of my speech? For, having been in an ecstasy, I cannot well remember. Phaedrus says, yes, indeed, that you did, and no mistake. Socrates says, Lysias should have begun, as I did, by defining love. Then I perceived that the nymphs of Achelous, and Pan, the son of Hermes, who inspired me, were far better rhetoricians than Lysias, the son of Cephalus. Alas, how far inferior to them he is. But perhaps I am mistaken. And Lysias, at the commencement of his lover's speech, did insist on our supposing love to be something or other which he fancied him to be, and according to this model, he fashioned and framed the remainder of his discourse. Suppose we read his beginning over again. What he's saying there is, suppose he assumed we knew what he meant and built his whole speech assuming we knew what the fuck he meant. Well, if we assume we know what he meant, let's go back and read it again. And Phaedrus says, if you please, but you will not find what you want. And Socrates says, read that I may have his exact words. And again, this is why I started reading Luke today. I thought to myself, well, I've been thinking a lot about what other people say about Luke. Phaedrus says, you know how matters stand with me. You know how matters stand with me, says Lysias, and how, as I conceive, they might be arranged for our common interest. And I maintain I ought not to fail in my suit because I am not your lover. For lovers repent of the kindnesses which they have shown when their love is over. Socrates says, he begins at the end. Here he appears to have done just the reverse of what he ought, for he has begun at the end and is swimming on his back through the flood of the place of starting. His address to the fair youth begins where the lover would have ended. Am I not right, sweet Phaedrus? Yes, indeed, Socrates, he does begin at the end. No order. Then, as to the other topics, are they not thrown down anyhow? Is there any principle in them? Why should the next topic follow next in order, or any other topic? I cannot help fancying in my ignorance that he wrote off boldly just what came into his head, but I dare say that you would recognize a rhetorical necessity in the succession of the several parts of the composition. And that's why I'm all the time saying, state your premise, state your premise, state your premise, state your premise, state your premise. I'm actually telling you to start at the end, because everything flows out of your premise. Everything flows out of the premise. State your fucking premise. I'm gonna go throw this away before it blows on the ground. How do your ideas, how do your premises, how do your concepts, how do your conclusions, how does your math flow can be derived from stating your premise. If you state your premise and add a thought, state your premise, build another thought, state your premise, build a third thought, you've got a fucking essay already written. All you now have to do is close up by stating your fucking premise. We were all taught this in 3rd grade. We were all taught this in 3rd grade. I'm starting to get agitated. Why am I getting so agitated? Because Socrates is so right. Phaedrus says, you have too good an opinion of me if you think that I have any such insight into his principles of composition. I'm going to read that last part back. Then is the other topics, are they not thrown? Are they not thrown down anyhow? Is there any principle in them? Why should the next topic follow next in order, or any other topic? I cannot help fancying, in my ignorance, that he wrote off boldly just what came into his head, but I dare say that you would recognize a rhetorical necessity in the succession of the several parts of the composition. And so what he's saying, he didn't think it out, he didn't practice it out, he didn't talk about it with the people around him, he most certainly didn't talk about it to you, PHAEDRUS, to whom it's addressed. He just sat down and wrote out his thoughts and called that good enough. He wrote a blog post, in other words. He wrote a blog post. He turned on TikTok before he thought, oh, that's a subject I should talk about. Turned on TikTok and then went, I don't actually know what I want to say about this topic because I haven't talked to anyone about it. So now I'm going to fight my way through it with you watching, and you may or may not get a takeaway at the end. I watch a lot of that. And so when PHAEDRUS says, you have too good an opinion of me if you think that I have any such insight into his principles of composition, what he's saying is that he might have written it to me, but he didn't practice it on me before he wrote it. I don't know how he writes. He doesn't talk to me about it. How are we doing for battery? So far, so good. And Socrates says, at any rate, you will allow that every discourse ought to be a living creature, having a body of its own and a head and feet. There should be a middle, beginning, and end, adapted to one another and to the whole. And PHAEDRUS says every discourse should be a living creature, having a body, head, and feet, certainly. Can this be said of the discourse of Lysias? See whether you can find any more connection in his words than in the epitaph, which is said by some to have been inscribed on the grave of Midas the Phrygian. And PHAEDRUS says, what is there remarkable in the epitaph? And Socrates says, it's as follows. I am a maiden of bronze and lie on the tomb of Midas. So long as water flows and tall trees grow, so long here on this spot by his sad tomb abiding, I shall declare to passers-by that Midas sleeps below. The discourse of Lysias had no more arrangement than the silliest of epitaphs. Now in this rhyme, whether a line comes first or comes last, as you will perceive, makes no difference. You're making fun of that oration of ours. Well, I will say no more about your friend's speech, lest I should give offense to you, although I think that it might furnish many other examples of what a man ought rather to avoid. But I will proceed to the other speech, which, as I think, is also suggestive to students of rhetoric. In what way? PHAEDRUS asks. Socrates says, the two speeches, as you may remember, were unalike. The one argued that the lover and the other that the non-lover ought to be accepted. And PHAEDRUS says, and right manfully. And Socrates says, you should rather say madly, and madness was the argument of them, for, as I said, love is madness. Yes. And of madness there were two kinds. One produced by human infirmity, the other was a divine release of the soul from the yoke of custom and convention. True. The divine madness was subdivided into four kinds: prophetic, initiatory, poetic, erotic, having four gods presiding over them. The first was the inspiration of Apollo, the second that of Dionysus, the third that of the Muses, the fourth that of Aphrodite and Eros. In the description of the last kind of madness, which was also said to be the best, we spoke of the affection of love in a figure, into which we introduced a tolerably credible, tolerably there being within the parameters of a certain tolerance, tolerably credible and possibly true through partly erring myth, which was also a hymn in honor of love, who is your Lord and also mine, PHAEDRUS, and the guardian of fair children, and to him we sung the hymn in measured and solemn strain. I know that I had great pleasure in listening to you, PHAEDRUS says. Okay, but did you listen to me, PHAEDRUS? Did you listen to what I said, or did you just enjoy the listening? Because if you didn't listen to what I said, I love you, pal, but I'm going to hit you now. Let us take this instance and note how the transition was made from blame to praise. What do you mean? The myth was a creation of fancy, yet two principles were involved in it. One, unity of particulars in a single note. Two, natural division into species. Fuck you, man, that was the editor again. I mean to say that the composition was mostly playful, yet in these chances, fancies of the hour were involved. Two principles of which we should be too glad to have a clearer description if art could give us one. What are they? First, the comprehension of scattered particulars in one idea, as if in our definition of love, which, whether true or false, certainly gave clearness and consistency to the discourse, the speaker should define his several notions and so make his meaning clear. What's the other principle, Socrates? The second principle is that of division into species according to the natural formation, where the joint is, not breaking any part as a bad carver might, just as our two discourses alike assumed, first of all, a single form of unreason. And that made me, for just a second, think there's a, I think it's a Taoist, or maybe a Zen Buddhist myth about a butcher who was the perfect carver. And that made me think of it for just a second. Just as our two discourses alike assumed, first of all, a single form of unreason, and then as the body, which from being one becomes double and may be divided into a left side and right side, each having parts right and left of the same name, after this manner the speaker proceeded to divide the parts of the left side and did not desist until he found in them an evil or left-handed love, which he justly reviled. And the other discourse leading us to the madness which lay on the right side found another love, also having the same name, but divine, which the speaker held up before us and applauded and affirmed to be the author of the greatest benefits. Phaedrus says, most true. And Socrates says, I am myself a great lover of these processes of division and generalization. They help me to speak and to think. And if I find any man who is able to see a one and many in nature, I follow him, or him I follow, he says, and walk in his footsteps as if he were a god. And those who have this art I have hitherto been in the habit of calling dialecticians. But God knows whether the name is right or not. And I should like to know what name you would give to your or to Lysias's disciples, and whether this may not be that famous art of rhetoric, which Thrasymachus and others teach and praise. Skillful speakers they are, and impart their skill to any who is willing to make things or kings of them and to bring them gifts to them. Phaedrus says, he is not to be confused with the rhetorician. Damn it. Yes, he says, they are royal men, but their art is not the same with the art of those with whom you call, and rightly, in my opinion, dialecticians. Still, we are in the dark about rhetoric. Socrates says, still, what do you mean? The remains of it, if there be anything remaining, which can be brought under rules of art, must be a fine thing, and, at any rate, is not to be despised by you and me. But how much is left? And Phaedrus says, there is a great deal surely to be found in books of rhetoric. Socrates says, yes. Thank you for reminding me. There is the exordium, showing how the speech should begin, if I remember rightly. That is what you mean. The niceties of the art? Phaedrus, yes. Socrates, then following the statement of facts, and upon that witnesses. Thirdly, proofs. Fourthly, probabilities are to come. The great Byzantine word maker also speaks, if I am not mistaken, of confirmation and further confirmation. You mean the excellent Theodorus? Yes, and he tells how refutation or further reputation is to be managed, whether in accusation or defense. I ought also to mention the illustrious Parian, Evenus, who first invented insinuations and indirect praises, and also indirect censures, which according to some he put into verse to help the memory. But shall I to dumb forgetfulness consign Tisias and Gorgias, who are not ignorant that probability is superior to truth, and who by force of argument make the little appear great and the great little, disguise the new in old fashions, and the old in new fashions, and have discovered forms for everything, either short or going on to infinity. I remember Prodicus laughing when I told him of this. He said that he had himself discovered the true rule of art, which was to be neither long nor short, but of a convenient length. And that's true, man. I'll tell you what. as a myself, rhetorician, orator, public speaker, shaggy dog storyteller, philoliteia, all these things that I'm doing all at the same time. It's the sweet spot I'm looking for. What video link will people click on? And then I'll just make everything that link because it's about being convenient. And Phaedrus says, well done, Prodicus. Then there is Hippias, Socrates continues, the Elean stranger, who probably agrees with him. Yes. And then there is Paulus, who is treasuries of diplasiology, I don't know what that is, and nomology, don't know what that is, and iconology, and who teaches them in the names of which Licymnius made him a present. They were to give a polish. Had not Protagoras something of the same sort? Phaedrus asks. Yes, Socrates says, rules of correct diction and many other fine precepts. For the sorrows or of a poor old man or any other pathetic case, no one is better than the Chalcedonian giant. He can put a whole company of people into a passion and out of one again by his mighty magic, and is first rate at inventing, of disposing of any sort of calumny on any grounds or none. Doesn't it sound like he's describing somebody like Tony Robbins? Isn't that his name? He's describing a what do they call those people actually? Just a public speaker, right? Public speaking is old, right? Motivational speakers is what he's talking about here. All of them agree in asserting that a speech should end in a recapitulation, though they do not all agree to use the same word. Phaedrus says, you mean that there should be a summing up of the arguments in order to remind the hearers of them. State your fucking premise. I have now said, Socrates says, all that I have to say of the art of rhetoric. Have you anything to add? Phaedrus says, not much, nothing very important. Leave the unimportant, Socrates says, and let us bring the really important questions into the light of day, which is, really important question, singular, which is, what power has this art of rhetoric, and when? Just two questions, Socrates. Phaedrus says, a very great power in public meetings. It has, Socrates agrees, but I should like to know whether you have the same feeling as I have about the rhetoricians. To me, there seem to be a great many holes in their web. Give an example. I will. Suppose a person to come to your friend Eryximachus, or to his father Acumenus, and to say to him, I know how to apply drugs, which shall have either a heating or a cooling effect, and I can give a vomit and also a purge, and all that sort of thing. And knowing all this as I do, I claim to be a physician and to make physicians by imparting this knowledge to others. What do you suppose that they would say? Phaedrus says, they would be sure to ask him whether he knew to whom he would give his medicines, and when, and how much. Socrates says, and suppose that he were to reply, no, I know nothing of all that. I expect the patient who consults me to be able to do these things for himself. Phaedrus says, they would say in reply that he is a madman or a pedant who fancies that he is a physician because he has read something in a book or has stumbled on a prescription or two, although he has no real understanding of the art of medicine. And Socrates says, what would Sophocles or Euripides say to the professors of rhetoric? And suppose a person were to come to I hate that. And suppose a person were to come to Sophocles or Euripides and say that he knows how to make a very long speech about a small matter, and a short speech about a great matter, and also a sorrowful speech, or a terrible, or a threatening speech, or any other kind of speech, and in teaching this fancies that he is teaching the art of tragedy. Phaedrus says they too would surely laugh at him if he fancies that tragedy is anything but the arranging of these elements in a manner which will be suitable to one another and to the whole. And Socrates says they would say to him in the most courteous manner and in the sweetest tone of voice, you only know the alphabet of your art. But I do not suppose that they would be rude or abusive to him. Would they not treat him as a musician? Would a man who thinks that he is a harmonist because he knows how to pitch the highest and lowest note? Happening to meet such an one, he would not say to him such an one, he would not say to him savagely, Fool, you are mad. But like a musician, in a gentle and harmonious tone of voice, he would answer, my good friend, he who would be a harmonist must certainly know this, and yet he may understand nothing of harmony if he has not got beyond your stage of knowledge, for you only know the preliminaries of harmony and not harmony itself. And Phaedrus says, very true. And then Socrates says, and will not Sophocles say to the display of the would-be tragedian that this is not tragedy, but the preliminaries of tragedy? And will not Acumenus say the same of medicine to the would-be physician? And Socrates says, quite true. So Phaedrus says, quite true. So Socrates continues, we should not be too hard on, and if Adrastus the mellifluous or Pericles heard of these wonderful arts, brachiologies, brachologies, and iconologies, and all the hard names which we have been endeavoring to draw into the light of day, what would they say? Instead of losing temper and applying uncomplimentary epithets, as you and I have been doing, to the authors of such an imaginary art, their superior wisdom would rather censure us, as well as them. Have a little patience, Phaedrus and Socrates. They would say, you should not be in such a passion with those who, from some want of dialectical skill and unable to define the nature of rhetoric, and consequently suppose that they have found the art in the preliminary conditions of it, and when these have been taught by them to others, fancy that the whole art of rhetoric has been taught by them. What he's saying is that, Shaggy, when you're watching YouTube because you want to listen to better at this than you, and you leave them an ugly comment, the ghosts of better people than you would say, maybe just let them be bad, because there are a whole group of people who don't know any better, and they most certainly were not educated in this in the way that you were, and your education is absolutely not why people come to your channel, and their education is 100% for certain not why anyone goes to theirs. So leave it alone. The gods don't care. I gotta find where I was because I looked away from the screen just long enough. But, they would continue, as to using the several instruments of the art effectively, or making the composition a whole, an application of it such as this, they regard as an easy thing, which their disciples may make for themselves. Phaedrus says, I quite admit, Socrates, that the art of rhetoric which these men teach, and of which they write, is such as you describe. There I agree with you, but I still want to know where and how the true art of rhetoric and persuasion is to be acquired. Socrates says, the perfection which is required of the finished orator is, or rather must be, like the perfection of anything else, partly given by nature, but may also be assisted by art. If you have the natural power and add to it knowledge and practice, and will be a distinguished speaker. You will be a distinguished speaker. I was talking about this on a live, maybe yesterday morning, actually. If you fall short in either of these, you will be to that extent defective. But the art, as far as there is an art of rhetoric, does not lie in the direction of Lysias or Thrasymachus. In what direction then lies it? Phaedrus asks. I conceive Pericles to have been the most accomplished of rhetoricians. What of that? Phaedrus asks, and I've read for you, Pericles. He's very good. Socrates says, all the great arts require discussion and high speculation about the truths of nature. Hence come loftiness of thought and completeness of execution. And this, as I conceive, was the quality which, in addition to his natural gifts, Pericles acquired from his intercourse with Anaxagoras, whom he happened to know. He was thus imbued with the higher philosophy and attained the knowledge of mind and the negative of mind, which were favorite themes of Anaxagoras, and applied what suited his purpose to the art of speaking. And Phaedrus says, explain. Socrates responds, rhetoric is like medicine. And Phaedrus asks, how so? And Socrates says, why? Because medicine has to define the nature of the body and the rhetoric of the soul. If we would proceed not empirically, but scientifically. In the one case, to impart health and strength by giving medicine and food, and the other, to implant the conviction of virtue which you desire by the right application of words and training. Phaedrus says, there, Socrates, I suspect that you are right. Socrates responds, and do you think that you can know the nature of the soul intelligently without knowing the nature of the whole? Phaedrus says, Hippocrates and Asclepiad said that the nature even of the body can only be understood as a whole. Socrates says, yes, friend, and he was right. Yeah, hand can't be understood as just a hand apart from the body it's attached to. Still, we ought not to be content with the name of Hippocrates, but to examine and so see whether his argument agrees with his conception of nature. I agree. First, there must be an analysis of the soul. Then consider what truth as well as Hippocrates says about this or about any other nature. Ought we not to consider first whether that which we wish to learn and to teach is a simple or multiform thing? And if simple, then to inquire what power it has of acting or being acted upon in relation to other things. And if multiform, then to number the forms. I was talking about this today. I was talking about this exact thing today when I was talking about meditating on synonyms. And see first in the case of one of them, and then in the case of all of them, what is that power of acting or being acted upon which makes each and all of them to be what they are. Phaedrus says, you may very likely be right, Socrates. I'm starting to get fatigued and hungry. I don't have enough money to eat on, but I am starting to get fatigued. So I want to look at something real quick, because if I'm getting fatigued, if I'm getting fatigued, what I'm not doing is giving you good explanation of what's happening. And that feels like as good a place to stop as any. I was just talking about this morning. It's going to be too hot to go back to my tent. And I feel a little bit of despair because I just can't afford to eat today. So I have to wait until it's cooled down and it's closer to dark to go up to Taco Bell. Trying not to worry, and I'm trying not to let the fear of the future. If I miss paying back this money that I owe if I don't get it paid back in time, it's just a $50 penalty, right? It's not the end of the world. But we do the work not for the reward. It's not about the reward. It's not about the money. The money would be nice. But we do the work for the work's sake. The work is what matters. I don't know how I'm going to do the work tomorrow. I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford to do the work tomorrow. And I'm starting to smell. But we'll cover that bridge when we get there. Cross that bridge when we get there. 2 likes is 2 more than I thought I would get today. So the likes just have to be what sustain me right now. The only time I'm really sad is when I can't eat.